Teachers of Reddit, what clicked about a pupil after meeting their parents? Obligatory, not a teacher, but I work at a psychiatric hospital for children and teens. I work directly with the kids, so I don't get to meet parents often. We had a super sweet little girl on my unit once. They said it was because she assaulted her little 3-year-old sister, but the whole thing just didn't make sense. I can read kids well, and usually the ones that are violent and dangerous to family have a certain attitude. She just didn't. She was meek, respectful, and just overall the easiest patient I'd ever had. When visitation came, her parents showed up and it all started to make sense. They would just berate her for everything. Here is this little 9-year-old girl and her mom is telling her she's faked up. Why can't she be normal, etc. And this kid just took it. Not for long though, because I'm allowed to remove the child at my discretion if I think it will make it worse for her, and so I did, and promptly called CPS. It turns out that all the abuse she was doing to her sister was just the mother abusing both of them and then blaming it on the little girl. You will all be happy to know that she was moved in with her grandparents in a different state and is thriving and happy. Edit. Thank you for the gold. Your Reddit #2. There are ways to volunteer your time helping children by becoming an advocate. The state always needs them, and you get to do good. If you are moved to do so, here is the link for the National Child Advocacy in the US. This is from back when I was doing my student teaching. There was a girl in one of my classes that never did any work in class, turned in her homework late, and would ignore huge projects until literally the last minute, and then ask to come in for help every day at lunch/after school to make up for the missing work. Eventually I caught her cheating on a quiz. She had written down the answers, put them in the plastic cover of her binder, and put her binder down by her feet. I took her quiz, gave her a 0, and told her that cheating wasn't allowed. About a week later, we had parent-teacher conferences. The girl came with her mother, who took out every assignment that had been graded and handed back, and proceeded to argue with me over individual points. Things along the lines of, well, she spelled it all right, so that deserves some credit, right? Or she circled the right answer, so she should still get some credit. When that right answer had been crossed off, and then another answer had been selected. This took nearly an hour to go through. Finally, the mother brought up the quiz, and I told her about the cheating. The mom said, well, you should give her some credit on it. She was pretty clever to think of that trick. From then on, I made sure to schedule meetings with myself, my mentor teacher, and the principal present. I was that kid. Father worked shifts, and when he was home he was doing backyard car repairs to help make ends meet. Not because he didn't earn a good living, he actually did, but because my mother was a gambling addict. Instead of addressing the problem, he focused on solving the symptoms. I went to school from an unheated house with a mother still in bed, and no breakfast in freezing weather with no coat, because she spent the money on gambling. Went 4 years without medical treatments for the same reason. No toothpaste, no hair conditioner, no haircuts, old shoes, socks, and underwear with holes, all because anything she could make us do without went to gambling. Hair was done in the frigid school gym in bare feet and a t-shirt, because gym shoes and sweatshirts cost money that could be used to make bets instead. One day the vice principal called me to her office, not to reprimand me, but to give me the optional pieces of uniform I didn't have, like a coat and a school blazer. They were the options without which you froze half to death as you walked or biked several miles to school. She didn't make a big deal out of it, she simply met a need. Her act of kindness lit a spark in me. To this day, almost 40 years later, I still put money, time and hard work into caring for others and charity work. I'm the mum who will volunteer at school, quietly contribute anything the teachers are short of, that person. Not for recognition or thanks. In fact, I'm embarrassed if you do that. It's because nearly 40 years ago someone cared. Not a teacher but a student. In kindergarten we had this kid who was really odd and smelled funny, but he seemed cool, so we would hang out at recess. I had a birthday party, and it was only supposed to last maybe a few hours. All of the kids but him went home fairly early, but it was really late and his parents still hadn't showed up. I was getting tired and wanted to go to bed, so my parents set up some blankets for us in the living room, and we had a sleepover. At 2 AM his parents finally show up, After multiple calls with no answer, instantly I realized what was up. Even as a small child I knew these parents were the definition of white trash. They reeked of alcohol. My mom's side of the family is full of alcoholics, so I knew what it smelled like. They also told some bullshit story about how they had new tires of their car and the speedometer showed the wrong speed, and they got pulled over, and some other bullshit. It all clicked, why he acted so odd, and why he smelled. It was cigarette smoke. At the start of first grade he never showed up, and a month into the year he was there for a few days. Then randomly in third grade he showed back up again for a few weeks. I never saw him again after that. I looked him up on Facebook a while back, and it looks like he is following in his parents' footsteps up, falling into every white trash stereotype. I asked my parents about this kid a while ago, and they said that the reason he wasn't with us in school for a few years is that he got taken away by Child Protective Services, which my mom called. Then he came back the W times, because that's when his parents got him back, but he was taken away again and that's why he left us. I feel bad for the kid, because at first he was really nice, but over time as I saw him again he became more mean and rude. Such shitty parents. I'm the kid point. When I was growing up, I'd get pulled aside and asked if I smoked. I'm talking elementary school. My parents, much like someone else had mentioned, smoked in the house with the windows closed. I was heavy, really heavy, with a lot of confidence issues that still stick around today. I had problems with anger growing up, not so much now, but I was an excellent student when you could inspire me to focus or found something I was passionate about. They'd meet my parents and nod to me. My dad, who would work swing and overtime every day, almost to support my mom's 2 to 3 pack a day habit at the time. Now it's only 1 pack, supposedly. My mom, who basically looked strung out on drugs, but was really just taking so many antipsychotics and pain meds that she might as well have been. My parents tried to be supportive of me, but I'm not sure they really knew how. I'd keep a bottle of Febreze on me starting in middle school because the questioning from teachers got worse. I'm graduating college in June, even though it's taken me twice as long as it should, mostly because of money, a lack of guidance, and my own mental BS. I got a job working in student government for the first time ever and was sent to a conference in Washington, D.C. by my college last year. I worked my first non-minimum wage job this summer and got invited to come back with another raise. To my 4th and 5th grade teacher, if you're reading this, I'm okay. I did it, and I hope your ladybug collection has grown. Edit. Holy moly, RIP my inbox, and thank you to the lovely stranger with gifting my first gold. Thank you so much for all of the lovely comments. I'm trying not to cry on the train to my vacation. It means the world to me. These children, there were 3 of them, were known for being difficult at the after-school care I worked in. I had always heard bad things about Dad, but not until I actually experienced it firsthand did I make the connection between his parenting and his kids' behavior. The eldest, 5th grade, would refuse to listen to us. He would often kick other children, provoke them by grabbing them and pulling them in close, or just act out in a way that was verbally abusive. When we asked him to stop, he would respond with "screw you." The middle, 3rd grade, struggled to pay attention for more than 5 minutes and often picked on other kids by intentionally stirring them up and spreading rumors. The youngest, kindergarten, was 6 but still not entirely toilet trained and had to repeat kindergarten because she wasn't at normal developmental or social levels. One afternoon, the eldest is in a pretty good mood. Because I'm curious, I ask, and he announces proudly, "Dad is picking me up early at 4 p.m. because we are going to see a movie this afternoon." This is awesome, because the 3 kids are always last to be picked up. But 4 p.m. comes and goes, and there's no sign of Dad. 4:30 p.m., 5 p.m., 6 p.m., 6:30 p.m. It's closing time. We get a call from Dad. "I'm sorry, I got caught up." It's almost 7 p.m. before Dad arrives. As the kids grab their bags, he tries to explain to me, but he's sort of all over the place. Some actual quotes from our conversation: "Don't tell the kids, but I'm so gone right now. I stayed back with some mates and had some drinks. Investment banking is stressful, so you look forward to Friday. So, you be, what, 20 now? What's a young pretty thing like you doing working so late on a Friday night? He offers to slip some cash to me and my co-worker for the extra time. My mate is driving us home. I only trust some of my mates with the new Porsche. The nail in the coffin was when eldest asked dad, "I thought you said we were going to see that movie tonight." To which he replies simply, "Oh, yes sorry mate, I forgot." And in that moment, I realized that these kids were being told over and over and over, "You don't really matter that much to me." Edit. About 2 months after this happened, the kids packed up and left the school with about a week's notice. Although they told us how much they hated us regularly, I hadn't ever seen them all as quiet as in that last week. We haven't seen them since. Edit. Formatting. Had a kid that you looked at and it was very much a lights are on but nobody is home sort of feeling. I teach high school so sometimes that's just the phase they are in, but this one was basically living perpetually in that mode. Kid has an IEP, individualized educational plan, which is a legal special education doc. I can't reveal what was in there but it was, suffice to say, generic. So it feels like there are pieces missing. Days go on, this kid is the gold standard of something is up, completely illegible handwriting to the point it doesn't resemble writing. You ask about what we are doing in class and the answer is so random and off task that if the kid didn't look and act fairly childlike for their age you would assume hardcore drug use, but this kid, if anything, had Ralph Wiggum genes and didn't know what drugs were. Mom comes back to school night which is supposed to be 5 minutes with a class of parents. A nice how do you do and everyone moves on. She corners me, immediately starts telling me about her concerns, that I don't fully appreciate her miracle baby who was mutant till 8, didn't walk until 4, walked backwards first, and had an IQ of about 60. They told her this kid would never make it in school, and didn't I think you just couldn't tell anything was ever delayed, because this is a miracle. That's why she blocked all mention of those conditions from the documents, because people would never guess otherwise. Miracle. When the word miracle comes up from a parent it always explains a lot. 0.0. Not yet a teacher, but studying to be one. In one of my major field experiences, there was a kid who was insanely competitive. He would take everything as a challenge and would accuse others of cheating if he lost. He even challenged me, a 19-year-old student at the time, to a race. I told him it really wouldn't be fair, since I was fully grown, and he started berating me that I was scared to race him. Mind you, he was 9 at the time, so the end of the year is coming around, and we had a field day where parents volunteered to do games for the kids, and it was supposed to be a fun day full of popsicles and school games. His parents had a relay race, spin around the bat, jump rope a certain distance, etc. And when it was his turn they encouraged him to cheat by not following their rules and got upset because some poor girl dropped the bat, obviously meaning she would be disqualified. They also brought a tug-of-war rope, and it was the girls of the class vs the boys. The girls being outnumbered, my field experience teacher put me on their team. I decided I wouldn't tug, so that it was a bit more fair, but once again the students' parents started getting red-faced telling him to win. I looked at my field experience teacher and she just nodded and I pulled. Kid got knocked down a peg. Why he was fluent in English, Spanish and German. I was teaching a grade 3 class that year, if I remember correctly, and I had the pleasure of teaching this wonderful polite young man named Mark. Mark was a delight to teach, very cheerful, picked things up quickly, got on well with the other kids. One day, we did a project on what makes me unique and Mark was having some trouble explaining what he wanted to write. He said, well, in German it would be, but in Spanish it could be, but I don't know how to write it in English. I asked him how he knew those languages, and he shrugged and said he thought most kids probably could, and that's all I could get out of him. Obviously I was curious, but I didn't want to pry too far and make him feel self-conscious about it, so I just helped him with his project and waited patiently for parent-teacher interviews. Both of Mark's parents showed up to the interview, and it was clear almost immediately why he was fluent in those languages. His mother and father were lovely people, but they had the annoying habit of switching language every few words when discussing with each other, before returning me a sentence in English. I asked them how they were so fluent, and it turns out that they had moved a lot because of the father's job, and the mother's career was very flexible. Internet-based income, I think. So that sorted that right out. Mystery solved point. Except that although he spoke English, Spanish and German, both his parents were Chinese. First year of working at my current job, not a teacher, but I do work with children on a daily basis, and I overhear this conversation between a group of 4th grade girls. Girl 1, what do you want to be when you grow up? Girl 2, I don't know, I really like dancing and stuff. Girl 3, I'm not sure either. What about you? Girl 1, I'm gonna get pregnant and get food stamps and welfare. I really wish I was embellishing this story. I wish to God that I was making all, or at least part of this up. When my coworker heard this, she about lost it. Well, we knew what mom was like, so it was no surprise. Unmarried, 4 kids at the time, and looked like she was no older than about 23. They were known amongst the staff for being in poverty, as the girls, yes, all her children were girls, frequently came in wearing the same/dirty clothes. Bills going unpaid, etc. We tried incredibly hard to change this. Numerous times when we had events we set aside something specifically for this family. When my partner at work heard this, she went ballistic. She contacted the university in my town and set up a field trip with numerous guest speakers from the dance team, cheerleading team, sports teams, and a few other groups, to show the kids what all they could get to do from going to college. The kids really seemed to enjoy it, especially those girls, and all they talked about the rest of the day was how cool those people were. I was an elementary teacher's aide for several years in college. We were having a parent-teacher conference with a struggling 5th grader and his parents. The poor kid was bright, but somewhat lazy, and reading at barely a 1st grade level. The teacher laid out what we've been working on with the student individually for the last few months, to try to improve his reading and get him engaged in learning. The teacher then gently suggested that the kid should be practicing his reading at home with an adult. I suggested that, since the kid loved Pokemon, there were some juvenile novelizations of Pokemon stories at the local bookstore that he may enjoy, and that it would help interest and engage him in improving his reading comprehension. I'll never forget the withering look the father gave me. We don't have extra money lying around to buy something that he can do at school. I was 19 at the time and shaky around confrontation, so I lowered my gaze and shut my mouth. The teacher reassured the parents that we were doing everything in our power to help their child, and that we would continue helping their son improve his reading. That was that point. A few days after this, the students were taking turns at the end of the day telling us something good that happened to them that week, a ritual that I really admire, that the teacher started. The kids loved it. When it was the struggling student's turn, he stood up and got an empty video game case and controller out of his bag and said, "This week, my dad bought the new PlayStation and lots of new games, and we've been staying up late every night playing." I almost cried in frustration and pity. Please understand, I have absolutely nothing against kids playing video games, but it has to be in moderation. His faking parents sat there and told us that they had no extra money to help their kid not only get better at learning, but actually enjoy doing it with something he loved, like a goddamn $4.99 book about Pokemon. But then they turn around and spend hundreds of dollars on a new PlayStation and games. Maybe buy your kid a book about video games as whole. So frustrating. I was a daycare teacher while going to college. I had one kid who was a total faking nightmare, Andrew. He was only a toddler, but imagine the terrible twas, and then increase them by 10x. Kids at that age are still learning proper behavior, but the rest of my kids understood basic manners. Andrew was a hurricane in human form. If there was a fight, Andrew was in the middle of it. He was the kid who'd start screaming in the middle of quiet time just to cause chaos. Wouldn't do what he was told, wouldn't listen to anybody, wouldn't keep his hands to himself. Every teacher in the place constantly wanted to strangle him, self included. Andrew was the only kid known by name to the entire teaching staff, even at the elementary school level. People would be like, "There goes Andrew's teacher, you/just need a username. Poor girl." He was that kid. Then I met his mom. I'm positive she was married, but I never saw Andrew's dad. Never even met him. The guy didn't seem involved in his son's life at all. The mom was a nervous wreck and talked to Andrew like he was a doll with a fatal disease who was going to die any day, not a real person with feelings of his own or who needed to learn a little self-autonomy. She insisted on doing everything for him as if he were completely incapable. At that point I realized I had to start praising the shit out of this kid because he certainly wasn't getting any direction or positive attention at home. So I wait for my opportunity. It took a few days, simply because Andrew was such a holy terror. But then suddenly, I'll never forget that fateful Tuesday. The kids are sitting at the lunch table waiting to wash their hands for lunch. I have to pick the first kid, and Andrew happens to be quietly sitting there with his hands folded while the other kids are jumping around in their seats. It was a true miracle. I'm sure somewhere nearby, people were reporting sightings of the Virgin Mary and the rivers running red. Andrew, I exclaimed. Andrew's sitting so nicely, I think he gets to wash his hands first today. Andrew looked scared when I called his name because he figured he was in trouble again. Then he figured out what was going on. The kid got out of his seat and approached me looking dazed, like he'd been unexpectedly called up to accept an Emmy. The other kids immediately went dead quiet because they wanted to be picked after Andrew. In that moment, Andrew became the star of the age-2 classroom. The other kids even started including him in their games. This started a feedback loop. Andrew behaved better, so he got more praise. Then he behaved even more. I'd reward Andrew by letting him hold the storybook for me during story time, or helping me with other things. Pretty soon he became like my personal assistant, because I'd turn around, and he was just there waiting to help me with something. That kid loved helping. It was incredible. Overnight, he became like a well-mannered Clark Kent. I think Andrew finally developed a sense of pride, something his anxious mom never allowed him. He wanted to wash his own hands, try the toilet by himself, and open doors, which he couldn't quite reach, but he improvised with a chair a few times, until I caught him. A few weeks into this, I saw his mom at the school. She was trying to tie Andrew's shoes, but he insisted, "No, I can do it." And he did. The look on her face was hilarious. It's like she finally realized he was a real person. I had to leave that job to go back to school a few months later. I was surprised to discover that telling Andrew was the hardest of all my kids, because I'd come to like him the most. By that point, he'd started calling me mommy, and while he stopped after I corrected him, it was clear he still designated me with that role in his mind. When I said I was leaving, he kept asking why and didn't understand. That was hard. I stopped by the school a year later to say hi to my old colleagues, and who do I happen to see but a few of my kids. They'd all grown so much in just a year's time, but I recognized them instantly. The kids saw me, but quickly lost interest. I was just some lady to them now, except for Andrew. He said nothing, but his eyes never left me. I wonder where he is now. In my first year of teaching high school, I was at an affluent high school, one of the best in the state. I taught honors and app students in tandem with another teacher, Pagelia setup. She taught the applet. I taught the history course paired with. The school did not then pair two app courses for Pagelia. I had a student, let's call him Tommy. He was a typical bright, but lazy 15-year-old white kid from an upper middle class family. He always had the latest phone. He could afford both pot and hard drugs. He got the 5-year-old hand-me-down BMW when he turned 16, and he had the entitled attitude to go with it. Normally, the Tommies of my school got B+s and As, just enough to get into the colleges they wanted, not so much that they actually had to work. Tommy, on the other hand, did nothing. Literally. If an assignment didn't happen in class, he didn't do it. If it did happen in class, he would hand in an empty page, and if you required him to do something, he would either abacadabra the multiple choice, or just put C for everything, or write one-word responses in short answer and essay sections. At first, I was sympathetic. I figured he was going through a divorce at home, or an undiagnosed dyslexic, or something. Discussed it with my co-teacher, but she just said, "No, that's just to me." I discussed it with the counselor, same result. It was really driving me nuts. This kid could easily go to college. There's a real chance he's on Reddit now, and he was torpedoing all of it. And worse, if he was known to be so useless, why did they let him into an app class in the first place? Our kids were bright, driven, and passionate, the sort of kids who came in crying when they missed a homework assignment, not the sort whose response to any question was, whatever, man. I documented everything. Sent letters home, offered him extra credit, tried any way I could to talk to him, made it very clear that I would fail him. And his response was still just, whatever, man. At the end of the semester, his grade was a 17. For non-Americans, bright, hardworking kids get a 93 to 98. Still bright but not as hardworking, and hardworking but not as bright kids get 85, 93. Hardworking but not bright get 77, 85. Anywhere below 77 is either a learning disability, a behavioral problem, or a poor fit to a class. The absolute basement is normally around 60. 17 is so low as to be unheard of. So, in due course, I failed him. As expected, I immediately heard back from the parents, who had been impossible to contact all semester. Turns out, she was a neurologist at one of the local university hospitals. He was high up in the state's attorney's office. They both came in, with earnest, sincere, good white Americans' expressions and voices, talking about how he's a good boy, surely we can work something out, etc. I said no. The time for that had been any of the 8 different documented occasions during the semester that I had tried to contact them. At this point, it was unfair to the other students to let him pass. Of course, they didn't like that at all. So they went to the principal, we all sat down and had a very long meeting, and the outcome was I gave him a test. His grade 4, that test was his grade for the semester. To me wasn't stupid, so of course he got a 94. And that was his grade, despite doing 0 work. After that, someone finally bothered to tell me that he had been doing just that for years, and his parents were such amazing pains in the hole that he had been getting away with it. I quit teaching after that. He should be about .27 now, and is probably a horrible human being somewhere. I wasn't the teacher. I was the kid. Growing up, my siblings and I'm the youngest of 4, adapted to a very dysfunctional lifestyle. My father was an abusive alcoholic that worked 80+ hours a week to support us on a farmer's salary, and my mother was depressed and had no ambition to do anything. I'm talking sleep all day, not cook us food, not take care of herself, go out in public wearing her ratty moo-moo and slippers with her hair all unkempt. My parents weren't equipped for children. But alas, they had 4 of us. Needless to say, my siblings and I raised ourselves. We grew up on cereal and microwaved meals, and witnessed my father beat our mother, and threatened to kill her with his gun countless times during his drunken rants. Although that was normal for us, it certainly had its lingering effects. Teachers always noticed how mature I was at such a young age, but couldn't understand why I was always so anxious, and seemed to be worried all the time. Many times I was told that I had wisdom beyond my years because I was able to look at a person and easily tell what was going on inside their head. My empathy for people was well developed, but I wasn't able to convey to anyone that I never felt safe. I was always on guard, and because of that, I had terrible anxiety. This led to me constantly chewing my fingers to a bloody mess, picking my lips, covering my ears during loud noises, and always being hyper aware of my surroundings. I never felt at peace. I was brought to guidance counselors many times where I talked to them about things that worried me, but it was always on a shallow level. I never talked about how daddy points his gun at mommy, and how mommy doesn't feed us. Instead, my siblings and I banded together and supported each other ourselves. We all left home early. My 2 brothers left as soon as they graduated high school and joined the military. My sister left at 15 to live with a boyfriend's family, and I left at 14 to live with a friend's family. I thrived there. I became the child I couldn't be before. Dad left my mom and quit drinking. He's become a rock for our family and has built love and trust with everyone. Seriously, he's a great man, but did some terrible things when he was younger. My mom, well, she's still the same. Depressed. Doesn't work. Lives with her brother and sister. Constantly comes to my siblings and I for help, and we give into it because it's just easier to give in than to fight and have to listen to you kids don't understand. I feel like I'm left behind and pushed to the side kind of rant. My siblings and I are still really close. We all have decent jobs, live in our own, raise and support our families. As for me, well, I struggle. Anxiety and depression are a beach. But I try to see the bright side of things. I just don't want to end up like her. I realize this is sort of off topic. Sorry, I guess I just needed to write this out. This one broke my heart, and it's something I still think about from time to time. Just a few months into my first year, several 5th grade students were sent home for lice. One was a small blonde girl named Jean who was fairly quiet and shy. Her clothes were always somewhat unkempt and had a strong cigarette smoke odor. She very rarely completed her homework and hated answering questions in class. However, she was kind, attentive, and performed well on her in-class assignments. We had another round of head checking about a week after the first one and found that Jane still had lice/caught lice again. She was sent home with a call to the parents letting them know. The next day she walked into the classroom with a shaved head. Her parents shaved her hair off so that they did not have to deal with the lice again. She cried when I asked her about it. I felt horrible for her. 5th grade is a tough place to be when you have something that is obviously different about you that other kids can pick on. I could not grow her hair back for her, but I did buy her a cute hat that I allowed her wear in my class if she wanted. It seemed to help. When I met her parents shortly after, they showed up with 3 younger kids that looked about a year apart with the same shaved haircut as Jane. The parents smelled like cigarette smoke and pet urine odor, and I could hear them cursing at their kids in the hallway before I even saw them. Not a teacher, but the story is relevant. Lengthy, but true. I worked for several years as a case manager for adults with mental illness, which put me in their homes on the daily. The one case that haunts me still is the family with 3 semi-functional family members: mom, son, daughter. The daughter's small, 1 to 2 year old child, and the son's live-in friend. The mother and son were both our clients, with various and sundry diagnoses. To say the house was filthy is not giving due diligence to the facility of the English language, but I suppose, for this narrative, it will suffice. At one point they somehow procured a little yappy dog who proceeded to pup everywhere. It got so bad we wouldn't go in the house, just meet with them on the porch, as no one ever seemed to clean anything at all. Ever enter CPS. They left the child in the home with the family of mentally ill folks, dog pup everywhere, and the gods of filth alone know what horrors. Their rationale was, a child needs to be with family. A short time later, a neighbor called the ASPCA, and they came and took the dog, declaring the home unfit for the pet. I have no idea what became of the child as I eventually changed jobs and lost contact with those involved, but occasionally when people bring up work war stories, this is my go-to tale. TLDR, social services is a crapshoot sometimes. Not a teacher, but spent some years in the Coast Guard. Had a kid report in that would have need several more levels of cognitive ability to be merely stupid. We will call him Factored. Factored, despite having been to machinery technician a school, didn't know the difference between oil and coolant. Factored couldn't understand the concept of buoyancy so much, so he couldn't understand how a steel ship could float. Our chief in the galley tried to show him using various bowls and cups. Big mistake, huge. Factard learned from this not buoyancy and displacement, but that despite having been on the ship for 3 months, this is when he learned it could sink. Yep, kid thought Coast Guard boats couldn't sink. That's why he had joined the Coast Guard. His recruiter showed him pictures of Navy boats sunk in Pearl Harbor. He never got qualified to do anything. He got wrote up multiple times for everything from master baiting on watch in the engine room to not showering for weeks, to his uniform looking like clothes a homeless hobo wouldn't be caught dead in. Well, we got to meet the parents, who had brought Factard's uncle's ashes to be buried at sea. He had served in Vietnam. Commanding officer and our chief are talking to his parents and assuring them that the burial will be no issue and we can video it if they like. So there we are, me, Maiko, and chief with Factard talking to his parents. Chief goes, what happened to uncle of Factard? Well, couple years back Factard and the uncle had insulated uncle of Factard's attic. Old cabin out in some woods. Well, times were hard. Logging had really tapered off. So the uncle and Factard had just used pine needles. So dad says, and the fire department thinks that the pine needles ignited some sort spontaneous way and he died in the fire. Well, that explains it. Gene pool was empty.